There are two things I learned early on in coming to work at the police department that were incredibly alarming to me. The first was that our literal first responders, our dispatchers, are the most likely to experience trauma because not only do they get that call where someone is at the peak of that emergency situation, but the dispatchers don't get closure. They don't get to see what happened at the end of the day. So they receive the emergency call and then they pass it on to the officers, and the officers will finish things up, but the dispatchers don't get to see that. The other statistic I learned is that law enforcement officers are more likely to die from suicide than from homicide. That's a huge tragedy. I think most people are probably shocked to hear that, but it is the fact. And so clearly, their line of work is causing significant emotional and psychological harm. And it's at a level that the general population doesn't see because we may see something on the news, we can change the channel. The first responders are always there, always seeing it, always dealing with it.
Officers used to be called to address violent crime, bank robberies, murders. Now they're called to address mental health crisis. They're called to almost any and every situation. When someone needs help, the first thing they do is pick up 911. They're responding to medical calls. They're really tasked. And that's not just officers and the men and women that are out there on the street serving, but also our dispatchers and our support staff, all of whom are asked to do a lot more to step up to the expectation. Fortunately, we're in a time where the community is extremely supportive and we're able to voice those concerns and ensure that we have the proper resources to be able to meet the expectation.
So the officers going through the academy always receive some sort of mental health and wellness training. They come out graduating with an understanding of what it means to encounter someone who may be experiencing a mental health crisis or an addiction crisis. What we've done recently is launch a more comprehensive program where they receive more training, not just for the officers, but the dispatchers as well. And we started out with mental health first aid for first responders. And then we also started getting our officers crisis intervention team trained. And that's really big because this is a 40-hour training that helps officers have a much better understanding of what they're looking at when they approach someone on the street who is having a mental health crisis. It gives them a better understanding of people who have developmental disabilities and folks who are dealing with addiction. And it also gives them the tools to be able to not just recognize what kind of scenario they may be approaching, but also to be able to engage that person in a way that is different from the standard police academy training.
From the CIT training that I received, the key points and key concepts that I would always keep in mind when we were dealing with a person in crisis is that we slow down, observe, give them space, allow them to talk, do not be forceful, but just give them that time to open up to you. We endured a young lady on Queens Chapel Road. She was just walking the street, but we got a call from a friend of hers. She said that she didn't really want to be around anymore. She wasn't returning to work. She was living out of her car, even though she had her own apartment or her home. But she was not doing things that she normally would do. When a person's in crisis, they're just dealing with that particular moment. They have that emotional change, their behavior change. It becomes negative. Majority of the time, a lot of people act out. They start, doing things that they normally wouldn't do. Officer Cherry sat down beside her and he built that rapport with her, asked her questions on what was going on. She slowly but surely, she opened up to him and, she broke down. She was in a state of crisis. She was dealing with a lot. It was just a lot for her to bear at the moment. And she felt like no one was listening to her and no one was able to help her at that moment. After talking to her, trying to figure out what was going on, we gave her, options. And from there, she made a decision to get the help that she needed.
So in our job, we aren't just limited to taking calls and dispatching. We have to review assaults, robberies, cuttings, murders, and review it several times. So we are reliving this incident over and over again, which it can be a little stressful on us. We go home And, you know, while we're at work, we don't really think about it, but once we get home, you kind of just sets in. It can be a little traumatizing at times.
The Mental Wellness Check-in Initiative is really designed to make sure that the officers and dispatchers who are dealing with trauma or even vicarious trauma because they're hearing about it from another officer or another dispatcher are able to share that information with a clinician if they choose to. The Mental Wellness Check-in Initiative is the outlet that officers and dispatchers really need because of the stressors they see every day.
I feel like since my wellness check-in, I'm more prepared. My mind is more clear, and then I'm able to approach any situation with a clear head and when it comes to an open mind than what I were before, because I have someone that I can relate to, and that can help me cope with the stresses of my job.
Talking to a family member, yes, it's helpful. You know, they're there to listen to you, but these counselors, they're there for you to help you kind of let out your feelings and give you exercises on how to deal with it. They're there to listen to you precisely for this kind of situation, these kind of stressors, and kind of just give you an outlet of how to handle it.
These programs are vital to what we do. Years ago, if you had spoken to a law enforcement officer or a chief for that matter about mental health and the role that it played in law enforcement and serving the community, you may have been laughed at. An officer who was having difficulties at home could not have brought that information forward in this profession. It was frowned upon. This was a very type A profession, macho profession, where an officer would be judged for being honest about their struggles. The impact that had on this profession is astronomical, because officers who come to work with their own struggles are not in a position to help those who are struggling out in our community.
You know, we have this training that we're putting in place and some of the existing training that has been here at the police department for years, but I always like to point out that the starting point is an officer and a dispatcher who have compassion and empathy. That's difficult to teach and train, and so we already have a department full of people who bring that to the table. Adding these programs just adds on top of what they already have.
I think being part of an organization that takes mental wellness very seriously and put to the top of the list is great. Makes me feel good, because the world is all about physical wellness, but now the world is also starting to realize that mental wellness is just as important, and that's kind of where our agency is at, where mental wellness is number one. So it makes me feel really good that we're taking major steps to make sure that not just our officers, but our citizens are taken care of.
The role that police officers serve in our community is probably one of the largest roles of any profession. Officers are expected to be able to help in any situation, right? And it doesn't matter if someone is in dire help during an emergency or if someone has locked their keys in their car. Folks call the police when they need help. So officers are really someone that's there for community, someone that can help in any situation. The officers are really just everyday heroes.